Today, I'm going to be reading Chapter 2 of All Quiet on the Western Front. It was strange to think that at home, in the drawer of my writing table, there lies the beginning of a play called Sal, and a bundle of poems. Many an evening I have worked over them. We all did something of the kind, but that was become so unreal to me, I cannot comprehend it any more. Our early life is cut off from the moment we came here, and that without our lifting a hand. We often try to look back on it and find an explanation, but we never quite succeed. For us young men of 20, everything is extraordinarily vague. For Kropp, Muller, Lear, and for me, for all of us whom Cataract calls the Iron Youth. All the older men are linked up with their previous life, their wives. They have wives, children, occupations, and interests. They have a background which is so strong that war cannot obligate it. We young men of 20, however, have only our parents and some, perhaps a girl, that is not much. For at our age, the influence of parents is at its weakest, and girls have not yet got a hold over us. Besides, there was little else, some enthusiasm, a few hobbies, and our school. Beyond this, our life did not extend. And this, nothing remains. Cantoric would say that we stood on the threshold of life, and so it would seem. We had, as yet, taken no root. The war swept us away. For the others, the older men, it is but an interruption. They are able to think beyond it. We, however, have been gripped by it and do not know what the end may be. We only know that in some strange and melancholy way we have become a wasteland. All the same, we are not often sad. Through Muller would be delighted to have Camarac's boots, but he is really quite as sympathetic as who could not bear to think of such a thing for grief. He merely sees things clearly. Were Kemerich able to make any use of the boots, then Muller would rather go barefoot over the barbed wire than scheme how to get hold of them. But as it is, the boots are quite inappropriate to Camarac's circumstances, whereas Muller can make good use of them. Camarac will die. It is immaterial who gets them. Why, more right than a hospital orderly. When Camarac is dead, it will be too late. Therefore, Muller is already on the watch. We have lost all sense of other considerations because they are artificial. Only the facts are real and important for us, and good boots are scarce. Once it was different. We went to discuss the district command to enlist. We were proud of the 20 young men, many of whom proudly shaved for the first time before going to the barracks. We had no definite plans for our future. Our thoughts of a career and occupation were as yet too unpracticable a character to furnish any scheme of life. We were still crammed full of vague ideas which gave to life and to war, also an ideal and most romantic character. We were trained in the army for 10 weeks, and in this time more profoundly influenced than by 10 years at school. We learned that a bright button is weightier than 4 volumes of scuba hotter. At first astonished, then embittered, and finally indifferent. We recognize that what matters is not the mind but the boot brush, not intelligence but system, not freedom but drill. We became soldiers with eagerness and enthusiasm, but they have done everything to knock that out of us. After 3 weeks, it was no longer incomprehensible to us that a braided postman should have more authority over us than had formerly our parents, our teachers, and a whole gamut of culture, from Plato to Goethe. With our young, awakened eyes, we saw that the classical concept of fatherland held by our teachers resolved itself here into a reconciliation of personality, such as one would not ask of the meanest servants. Salutes, springing to attention, parade marches, presenting arms, right wheel, left wheel, clicking heels, insults, and 1,000 pettifogging details. We had fancied our task would be different, only to find we were to be trained for heroism, as though we were circus ponies. But as soon as accustom ourselves We learned, in fact, that some of these things were necessary, but the rest merely show. Soldiers have those fine nose for such distinctions. By 3 or 4, our class was scattered over the platoons against the Frisian fishermen, peasants, and laborers, with whom we soon made friends. Krop, Muller, Kemmerich, and I went to the 9th platoon under Corporal Himmelstas. He had a reputation of being the strictest disciplinary in the camp, and was proud of it. He was a small, undersized fellow with a foxy waxed mustache, who had seen 12 years of service and was in civil life a postman. He had a special dislike of Krop, Chijin, Westhus, and me, because he sensed a quiet defense. I had remade his bed 14 times in one morning. Each time he may had some fault to find and pulled it to pieces. I needed a pair of prehistoric boots that were as hard as iron for 20 hours with intervals, of course, until they became as soft as butter, and not even Himmelstas could find anything more to do with them. Under his orders, I scrubbed over the corporal's mess with a toothbrush. Krop and I were given the job of clearing the barrack square of snow with a hand broom and a dustpan, and we have gone on till we were frozen and had not Lieutenant Accident appeared, who sent us off, and hauled Himmelstas over the coals. But the only result of this was to make Himmelstas hate us more. For 6 consecutive weeks I did guard every Sunday, and was hut orderly for the same length of time. With a full pack and rifle, I had to precise on wet, soft, newly plowed field the prepare to advance, and lie down until was one lump of mud and finally collapsed. For hours later, I had to report to Himmelstas with my clothes scrubbed clean, my hands chafed and bleeding. Together with Krop, Westus, and Tijan, I have stood at attention in the hard frost without gloves for a quarter of an hour at a stretch, while Himmelstas watched for the slightest movement of our bare fingers on steel barrels of a rifle. I had run 8 times from the top floor of the barracks down to the courtyard with my shirt at 2 o'clock in the morning because my drawers projected 3 inches beyond the edge of the stool on which had to stack all things. Alongside me ran the Corporal Himmelstas and trod on my bare foot. At buoyant practice, I constantly fight with Himmelstas. I had a heavy iron weapon, which he had a handy wooden one, with which he easily struck my arms till they were blue and black. Once, indeed, I became so infuriated I ran at him blindly and gave him a mighty jab in the stomach and knocked him down. When he reported me to the company commander, laughed at him, and told him he ought to keep his eyes open, he understood Himmelstas and apparently displeased at his discomfiture. I became a past master on the parallel bars and excelled at physical jerks. We have trembled at the mere sound of his voice. Of his runaway post horse never got the better of us. One Sunday, as Krop and I were lugging a latrine bucket on the pole across the barrack yard, Himmelstas came by, all polished up and spry for going out. He planted himself in front of us and asked how we liked the job. In spite of ourselves, we tripped and emptied the buckets over his legs. He raved, but the limit had been reached. That means clink, he yelled, but Krop had enough. There'll be an inquiry first, he said, and then we'll unload. Mind how you speak, you non-commissioned officer, bawled Himmelstas. Have you lost your senses? You wait till you're spoken to. What you do anyway? Show up, Corporal, said Krop, his thumbs in line with seams of his trousers. Himmelstas saw that we met it, and went off without saying a word. But before he disappeared, he growled, "You'll drink this!" But that was the end of his authority. He tried it on once more and plowed the field with his "Prepare to advance, and lie down." We obeyed such orders, since an order is an order and it has to be obeyed. But we did it so slowly, with Himmelstas became desperate. Carefully, we went down on our knees, then on our hands, and so on. In the meantime, quite infuriated, he went another commander, but before we had even begun to sweat, he was hoarse. After that, he left us in peace. He did indeed always refer to us as swine, but there was, nevertheless, a certain respect in his tone. There were many other staff corporals, the majority of whom were more decent, but above all of them wanted to keep his good job there as long as possible, and this he could do only by being strict with the recruits. So we were put through even conceivable refinement on the parade ground soldiering till we often howled with rage. Many of us became ill through it. Wolf actually died of inflammation of the lung. But we would have felt ridiculously had we hauled down our colors. We became hard, suspicious, pitiless, vicious, tough, and was good. For these attributes were just what we lacked. Had we have gone into trenches without this period of training, most of us would certainly have gone mad. Only thus we prepared for what awaited us. We did not break down, but adapted ourselves. Our 20 years, which made another thing so grievous, helped us in this. But by far the most important result was that it awakened in us a strong practical sense of Estes corpse, which in the field developed into the finest thing that arose out of war. Out of war is comradeship. I sat by Camarak's bed. He is sinking steadily. Around us in a great commotion. A hospital train has arrived, and the wounded fit to be moved are being selected. The doctor passes by Camarak's bed without once looking at him. Next time, Franz, I say. He raises himself on the pillow with his elbows. They have amputated my leg. He knows it too, then. I nod and answer. You must be thankful you've come off with that. He's silent. I resume. It might have been both legs, Franz. Wegler has lost his right arm. That's much worse. Besides, you'll be going home. He looks at me. Do you think so? Of course, do you think so? He repeats. Sure, Franz. Once you've got over the operation, he beckons me to bend down. I stoop over, and he whispers, I don't think so. Don't talk rubbish, Franz. In a couple of days, you'll see for yourself. What it is anyway, an amputated leg? Here they patch up far worse things than that. He lifts one hand. Look here through these fingers. That's the result of the operation. Just eat decently and you'll soon be well again. Do they look after you properly? He points to a dish that is still half full. I get excited. Franz, you must eat. Eating is the main thing. That looks too good. That looks good too. He turns away. After a pause, he says slowly, I want to become a head forester once. So you may still, I assure him. There are splendid artificial limbs now, and you'd hardly know there was anything missing. They are fixed on the muscles. You can move the fingers and work and even write with an artificial hand. And besides, we'll always be making new improvements. For a while he lies still. Then he says, You can take my lace-up boots with you, Muller. I nod and wonder what to say to encourage him. His lips had fallen away. His mouth has become larger. His teeth stick out and look as though they were made of chalk. The flesh melts. The forehead bulges more prominently than the cheekbones protrude. The skeleton is working itself through. The eyes are already sunken. In a couple of hours it will be over. He is not the first that I have seen thus. But we grew up together, and that always makes it a bit different. I have copied his essays at school. He used to wear a brown coat with a belt and skinny and shiny sleeves. He was the only one of us two who could do the giant's turn on the horizontal bar. His hair flew in his face like silk when he did it. Cataract was proud of him, but he couldn't stand cigarettes. His skin was very white, and he had something of the girl about him. I glance at my boots. They are big and clumsy. The breeches are tucked into them, and standing up, one looks well built and powerful in these great drain pipes. But when we go bathing and strip, suddenly we have slender legs again and slight shoulders. We are no longer soldiers, but little more than boys. No one would ever believe that we could carry packs. It is such a strange moment when we stand naked. Then we become civilians, and we almost feel ourselves to be so. When bathing, Franz Kemmerich looked as slight and as frail as a child. Where he lies now, but why? The whole world ought to pass by this bed and stay. That is Franz Kemmerich, 19.5 years old. He doesn't want to die. Let him not die. My thoughts become confused. The atmosphere of carbolic and grenadine clogs the lungs. It is a thick gruel. It suffocates. It grows dark. Kemmerich's face changes color. It lifts from the pillow and is so pale that it gleams. The mouth moves slightly. I draw near to him. He whispers, "If you find my watch, send it home." I did not reply. It is no use any more. No one can console him. I retched with helplessness, this forehead with its hollow temples, this mouth, and now it seems all teeth, this sharp nose, and the fat, weeping woman at home to whom I must write. The only letter were sent off already. Hospital order lines go to and fro with bottles and pails, and one of them comes up, casts a glance at Kemmerich, and goes away again. You can see he is waiting. Apparently he wants the bed. I bend over Franz, and talk to him as though that could save him. Perhaps you will go to the convalescent home at Klosterberg among the villas, Franz. Then you can look out from the window across the fields to the two trees on the horizon. It is the loveliest time of year now. When the corn ripens at evening, the fields and the sunlight look like the mother of pearl. In the lane of the poplars by Klosterbeck, where we used to catch sticklebacks, you can build an aquarium again and keep fish in it. And you can go without asking anyone. You can even play the piano if you want to. I lean down over his face, which lies in the shadow. He still breathes lightly. His face is wet. He is crying. What a fine mess I have made of this with my foolish talk. But Franz, I put my arm around his shoulder and put my face against his. Will you sleep now? He does not answer. The tears run down his cheeks, and I would like to wipe them away, but my handkerchief is too dirty. An hour passes. I sit tensely and watch his every movement in case he may perhaps say something. What if he were to open his mouth and cry out? But he only weeps, his head turned aside. He does not speak of his mother or of his brothers and sisters. He says nothing. All that lies behind him. He is entirely alone now with his little life of 19 years, and cries because it leaves him. This is the most disturbing and hardest parting that I have ever seen, although it was pretty bad, too, with Tijan, who called for his mother, a big bear of a fellow who, with the wild eyes full of terror, held off the doctor from his bed with a dagger until he collapsed. Suddenly, Kemerich groans and begins to gurgle. I jump up, stumble outside, and demand, "Where's the doctor? Where's the doctor?" As I catch a sight of a white apron, I seize hold of it. "Come on, quick! Franz Kemerich is dying." He frees himself and asks the orderly to stand by. "Will that be?" He says, "Bed 26, amputated thigh." He sniffs. "How should I know about it? I've amputated 5 legs today." He shoves me away, and the hospital orderly says to the hospital orderly, You see to it," and hurries off to the operating room. I tremble with rage as I go along with the orderly. The man looks at me and says, "One operation after another since 5 o'clock this morning. You know, today alone there has been 16 deaths. Yours is the 17th. There will probably be 20 altogether. I become faint all at once. I cannot do any more. I won't reveal any more. It is senseless. I could drop down and never rise up again. We are by Kemmerich's bed. He is dead. The face is still wet from the tears. The eyes are half open like yellow old horn buttons. The orderly pokes me in the ribs. Are you taking his things with you?" I nod. "Are taking with things with you?" I nod. He goes on, "We must take him away at once. We want the bed." Outside, they are laying on the floor. I collect Kamarach's things and untie his identification disc. The orderly asks about the paybook, and I say that it's probably in the orderly room and go. Behind me, they are already hauling Franz on the waterproof sheet. Outside the door, I am aware of the darkness and the wind as a deliverance. I breathe as deep as I can and feel the breeze in my face. Warm and soft as never before, thoughts of girls, of flowery meadows, of white clouds suddenly come into my head. My feet began to move forward in my boots. I go quicker. I run. Soldiers pass by me. I hear their voices without understanding. The earth is streaming with forces which pour into me through the soles of my feet. The night crackles electrically. The front thunders like a concert of drums. My limbs move supplely. I feel my joints strong. I breathe the air deeply. The night lives. I live. I feel a hunger greater than comes from the belly alone. Muller stands in front of the hut, waiting for me. I give him the boots. We go in, and he tries them on. They fit well. He roots among his supplies and offers me a fine piece of suave. With it goes hot tea and rum. That is all for today. Thank you for listening.